So it gives me great pleasure, first, to be here in Wisconsin. I've been running Wisconsin up the flagpole as getting it right on a lot of things around the pandemic and good, solid, enlightened data practice. And it's just nice to be here. So I'll hand it off to Chris Diller, the GIS coordinator for Wisconsin, and he will take us through a host state presentation. Really happy to have you.
Thank you, Frank. It's really good to see so many faces. I think the last NSGIC I attended was pre-pandemic in Santa Fe, and then kind of all hell broke loose. It's hard to get together and see everyone, so it's very nice to be here in person. Hopefully we can do more of this going forward. So before I dive in great detail, one of the things I'd like to do is just kind of talk about our GIS, Wisconsin GIS Olympic team, a little Winter Olympic theme, if you don't mind, for a few slides. We have a little fun here. SAGIC, State Agency GIS Coordination Team, and we've got a number of state agencies that are heavily involved in GIS. And so I've got a little sample of, during my little talk here, about some of the gold medal winning maps and applications and programs that we've got going on here in the state of Wisconsin. Unfortunately, I don't have 3 or 4 hours. I couldn't bring everybody here, but I do have a sample of some of our gold medal winning team here with us today that's going to talk about some of the things that they're doing. But I wanted to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about some of the other agencies and what they're doing. But let's have a little fun first. So some say our team at the DNR slalomed their way to new hydro, but the reality is that Wisconsin has a strong Nordic combined team tackling hydro and wetlands together. While the Wisconsin GIS DNR team have cross-country skied to an updated land cover, our bobsled team at the Public Service Commission has high speeds to broadband mapping. Lidar is useful to help with navigating ski moguls, but the amount of coordinated needed takes a biathlon-like effort from our GIO. Hitting the mark and working tirelessly is the name of the game. Our Wisconsin Regional Ortho Consortium, WROC team, seems to always put up a great performance in ski ortho aerials. The Wisconsin Department of Health Service COVID mapping team seemed to just freestyle to a winning performance, breaking barriers by twisting and flipping to new methodologies that everyone else hopes to someday replicate. Wisconsin Legislative GIS team curls their way to redistricting, not because it is always scientific, but because it is more of an art form to get it just right. Several versions are curled into production before getting swept away, but every 10 years, they seem to always hammer home the outcome in the last end. The Wisconsin Elections Commission mapping is an ice hockey assist to the biggest team event that takes place every 4 years in our country. But like figure skating, our parcels are the main event and a thing of beauty, no matter the result. Hope you enjoyed that. Welcome to Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a wonderful state. I thoroughly enjoy living here. There's so many outdoor activities, and you're here in Milwaukee. But if you have a chance to come back in the summer months, or if I know a few of you have been out skiing this past weekend in northern Wisconsin. There's all sorts of beautiful and wonderful things to do. You can check out our travelwisconsin.com, and you might find a few links to some of our GIS applications that some of our gold medal winning agencies are putting together. Here are just a few of these. Oops. Uh-oh. There we go. So the Wisconsin Department of Transportation has, pretty good application. They've had a rustic road program for a number of years in Wisconsin. It's managed by a board since the early 70s. And the beautiful thing, I'm not going to read everything that's on here. You guys can read this, but really the big thing about the Wisconsin roads, at least from my perspective, is it allows people in our state and other people visiting an opportunity to see some of the best parts of Wisconsin. whether it's, old bridges or covered bridges or beautiful scenery. There's lots to see in these rustic roads. And so each road is demarked by a sign. It'll say rustic road. There'll be a number next to it. So this app is a great way to find a road that you want to travel on. I'm sure some people will attempt to travel all 700 and some miles of rustic roads at some point. This is the one I would like to show you live, but I talked to Emily. It was a little bit more challenging to flip between here and live. But by the way, all these slides, I'm putting links so you can download the slides and you can access these applications on your own at a later time. But given the keynote and the following discussion on climate change, this slide is very relevant. And this is a really, really cool application that our Natural Resources Department has put together, a story map for urban foresters to help them determine and develop a plan to diversify the urban forest for the future, identifying in the state where we're going to be at in 50 years. If they're planting trees that cannot withstand the climate change, then why plant them? And so this tool is very useful. The bottom right-hand corner is also a good map. It has, and this is one I just found out about recently. They've put together an inventory of trees in Wisconsin, urban trees. They've collected from each of the municipalities, or most of them, their tree inventory by species. Many of our urban friends at the GIS level have gone out and mapped all the trees and classified them. And so it's a valuable resource to help better plan for the future when we're talking about climate resiliency. So we're a little different than most other states. We don't really have, at least in the executive branch, a place in which you can download data, a portal. But our state cartographer's office, part of the University of Wisconsin and the Map Robinson Library, have gone ahead and put this great little portal together that folks can find and access information or data. It's got historical data. And one of the big things that the Map Robinson Library has done is scan some really old photos dating back into late 30s and early 40s. There's a whole bunch of other data that's in here, and it's kind of fun to explore and take a look at. So I encourage you to take a look at that at some point. So our DNR has also recently put together a new fire management dashboard, but also they put together a prescribed burn dashboard, which is really an interesting piece. The idea here is obviously on an emergency management side, on the fire management dashboard, to see what's going on and to be able to react very quickly. But the prescribed burn one is also interesting because there's an environmental quality to this. What are we burning? What kind of habitat are we burning? And what is the plan? It's available publicly, and it allows not only for the managers at the DNR to have a better plan to move forward, but help those at the local level too, of what they're burning, and provide that information to the public. So Coulter here is going to talk a little bit about broadband mapping during his 15 minutes, but I thought I'd put something here on our school district. So our Department of Public Instruction does a lot of really good job with their school district mapping. And one of the things they're doing here is internet-based mapping and providing the public a better idea of what ISP are available in their school district. The map on the right is the reliability of some of the service that are available. And you basically, it's a wizard-driven thing. You just pick, the school districts that you're in. You can see all the available providers that are there, and you can sort through them to see if that's something that's going to cover your home or your community. And these are really good tools to help us better understand the broadband piece and helping bridge the gap between low income challenged students and other demographics to try to bridge that gap on the education side. This is also a really cool map, Wisconsin Shipwrecks. The Wisconsin Historical Society and Sea Grant, part of the UW side, have put together a wonderful map. And it's here to provide historical shipwrecks. It comes with photos, locations. There even are a few places that support diving. And so there's some information and maps, very specific, detailed maps on diving. Very cool map. recently discovered this one as well. Doing business in Wisconsin, super important. This is really from our Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Yes, they are a public agency or quasi-public agency, public/private by statute. But this is a tool that allows anybody who wants to do business in Wisconsin to find properties, find open spaces to put their business in. And it's a pretty cool map and very helpful. Farmland preservation, Department of Agriculture. They're doing some wonderful things. They're doing a whole bunch of things, but this is just one thing that they're doing here, allowing, managing the farmland and trying to maintain that farmland and identifying things that are encroaching on farms. We're losing in Dane County, where Madison is, we're losing quite a bit of farms every single day, either to mega farms or local ordinances changing the zoning into residential. We are losing those farms and we're trying to preserve them as much as we can. So just real quickly, all of these applications and the data behind them are possible here in Wisconsin. If you're not, many of you may be familiar with the Land Information Program in Wisconsin, but I'll take a minute or two to kind of explain it to you. This is how Wisconsin is funded. We're funded at the local level. We're not really funded centrally at the state level. The activities that are done at the state level are funded by the individual agencies. The Land Information Program was created in the late 90s, and there is money every time a property is recorded or the deed is recorded. $30 is saved up. 15 goes to the county. They can do whatever they want. The rest of it is split specifically for GIS or land information programs. The idea here is to modernize land records from paper into digital. And that's really what this program is about. And without it, we are not where we are at today. We have a little more work on this. We'd like to see some funding at the state level, but that's going to have to come at a later day. Last couple slides here. A few years ago, the legislature passed a statute requiring the state to publish a statewide digital parcel map. It's done on an annual basis now. We're in version 7, and this summer at the end of June will be version 8. This map on the left, State Cartographer's Office did this really cool map showing the changes in property values from 2016 to 2020. I'd really like to have this one done again post-COVID. I say that because there's so many properties up northern Wisconsin that got bought up by residents in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Chicago area who went remote and needed to go somewhere or wanted to go somewhere and get out of the big cities. I know friends who have sold properties for a lot more than they were worth post-pandemic. So I thought that was quite interesting. So a little update on Next Gen 911. Not going to spend a lot of time on this. I just put it in here, those that are interested. The big thing is there's a lot more work here in Wisconsin that we need to do. There's an RFP that's going to be coming into the street in this calendar year, specifically on GIS. But the point I want to make about this particular slide is 911 is optional for PSAPs. PSAPs are not forced to go to 911. But let's face it, most of them are probably going to be heading that direction at some point as equipment starts dying. So redistricting. Well, I asked the folks at the legislature if they would like to talk about this today, and they declined, mainly because they're busy. They're busy reacting to requests from the legislature and the governor's office and what the state Supreme Court, anticipating the state Supreme Court ruling here any day. So getting very closely to having that done. The WISE Decade is a suite of tools that allows local government to participate into the BAS and CBAS program, updating their boundary files and getting them just right into the Tiger line files. And it's an important component to that. So again, I'm not going to read all this. They're here. And that's it for me. I'll be around if you have questions. And so we're going to move on to Jim's topic. Yep. Green advances forward. Red goes back.
Okay. So here we go again. So we talked a little bit about Lidar this morning. We're with the current flight season coming up here, we're going to finish the state under the 3DEP program. We've got a 12 county project with 8 of those at QL1. So all those northern forested counties are getting covered with the QL1. And so we're almost as good as Minnesota, but not quite. We did achieve a statewide coverage back in 2018, but not all these counties were available. And some of them weren't to the national standard. Approximately costing $13 million to complete the state under the 3DEP program, with about 4.5–5 million, give or take, being our local match. So that's most of that was the counties participating, and that's why the map looks like this. We're very much a locally driven situation. Okay, we're getting ready for the 3D hydrography program. We're looking forward to that. And this gentleman is our new USGS liaison, mapping liaison, Mitch Ferguson. He's also Minnesota and Iowa. And Mitch used to kind of run the NWI contracting for Fish and Wildlife. So we feel really, really lucky that we've got him working for us now. Environmental equity. We have a state agency team. This guy down on the end is on there, and we're trying to figure out how to do kind of what some of the other states have done, an environmental equity mapping tool that we can put state specific data into. We heard Mickey talking about land cover. I don't think they're going to be quite doing this extent of this data. I didn't have the correct slide, but it does include probably about 1/3 of the state, and we're looking forward to that. Yeah, there's that 1 meter stuff there on the end. Gee, I just had that one. There we go. And then finally, Wisconsin has had a climate change impact group. This is between the DNR and the university's Nelson Institute. And this was very active 10–12 years ago, and then it had to go underground for a couple of administrations. And it's recently come back to light. And Larry Cuthbert, our DNR GIS manager, managed to get us a seat at the table. And a geospatial working group is now a part of this. And so we're very happy to be able to be talking to all these other groups, infrastructure, education, agricultural, forestry. They're all using our data, but you don't see that when they're talking to like the governor's office and other folks. So it's very important that we finally sort of made a breakthrough on this front. So I think that's it for me.
Green means go. I think when Chris set this up, he made a point to have the 2 most talkative speakers at the end, just in case there was a disaster. But I've heard about this famous 25-year-old clock here, so I'm hoping it keeps me on task. But seriously, I do want to extend a thank you to Chris, and by extension, you all in the NSGIC community, for inviting myself and Jim and Andy to participate here in the Midyear today. As the slide indicates, I'm Coulter Sikora from the State of Wisconsin's Public Service Commission, and I'm going to talk about how we leverage GIS to help expand broadband which I think could easily be flipped, especially in light of some of the talks earlier today, to something like leveraging broadband to expand the good of GIS. So let's see if I've got this green thing right. Uh-oh. There we go. So to provide a little historical context of the work I'm involved with in my mapping team and broadband colleagues are involved with at the PSC, we've been a broadband working unit of sorts since the very late aughts, early teens, back in the, hopefully I've got this acronym right, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act days, if you remember that program. We started as a very small outfit just trying to do like regional planning for broadband, which eventually became contracted mapping services, which eventually became in-house mapping services, which is where I came in about 2013. And we grew a little broadband grant program, which, given all the attention broadband has received these days, has gotten a lot bigger. Our current round is up to $100 million worth of funding for this fiscal year, which is super exciting and a whole lot of work. We've also expanded to have, at this point, roughly 2 1/3 mappers, including myself, on staff. So we're juggling a lot of different work, especially with what's being thrown at us these days. And there are a number of broadband and telecommunications staffers involved in our office as well. And somewhere on top of the broadband mapping, I'm also in charge of overseeing the GIS infrastructure, software, all that good stuff for 2 other working units within our agency. There's about 10 of us in the Public Service Commission who do mapping of some sort. So focusing on the main focus of my day job and the broadband team, our maps and the data behind those maps drive a lot of our core programs. This slide here would have been just as relevant before the pandemic, and the pandemic basically threw gasoline on a fire that was already building. So a few of our big things, and I will give all of these a deeper highlight here in the next few minutes, will be our broadband maps and planning tools, including our flagship mapping application, the Wisconsin Broadband Map, our grant program that we've rolled out money for 363 projects going back to fiscal year 2014, our work to really kind of democratize the broadband mapping and broadband data reporting process, and trying to expand our resources for affordability and measuring affordability and adoption here across Wisconsin. And I don't think I need to explain it. You can probably imagine it yourselves, but we need good data to get this work to shine and serve everyone here in Wisconsin. So pointing at the Wisconsin Broadband Map, like I mentioned, this is kind of our flagship product, the thing that we send the public, broadband providers, and other stakeholders to really get a glimpse of what is going on in the coverage scene here in Wisconsin. And as the map is designed, it's really serving as a consumer broadband, a residential broadband resource. You can go ahead and look up what coverage looks like or may look like at your local level. And what we've seen over the years, I'm not going to go into the weeds of the FCC data reporting process. Generally, you all probably know that overstatement is the rule of the game, and that I'm not going to say is anybody's fault in particular. It was the best that could be done several years ago, but we've made steps to integrate direct data from the internet service provider community to make this map more accurate, and it's still something we are working on now. And we use the FCC census block-based data where we need to. And this has largely been supported by a voluntary data collection program that we've run at the commission since 2018. And probably the exciting thing, especially for folks here on the local level, is that coverage data, especially our granular content that we receive from providers, informs our broadband grant eligibility mapping layer, which we just released last Thursday in an updated format. It drew such reactions as an email I received this morning saying, "Coulter, thanks a lot for updating the grant layer 2 weeks before the statewide mapping conference," as if I didn't have enough other stuff to do. With love, County GIS staffer. But you know, it's the nature of the game. We had to, we've been able to get this coverage data in the middle of a grant round, and it's our responsibility to serve this data up as quickly as we reasonably can. Broadband's been an increasingly building issue over several years, but with the pandemic and following the lead of our current administration, we reached kind of a new level of really having the rubber meet the road through our governor's task force of broadband access, which beyond that term access, us, the mappers at the PSC, stakeholders focusing on other parts of the whole broadband picture, both public and private, really dove into what I would call the 3 A's of the broadband puzzle: access, affordability, and adoption. And with that, we had kind of a data and mapping subgroup in this task force. And much to my joy, we were able to take those discussions and come up with a number of recommendations that really are meant to kind of drive or help provide some official guidance to what we need to do to improve our broadband mapping situation to affect and improve access, affordability, and adoption here in the state. So this is largely one of those fun read-off slides, but I'll give you a bit of a summary because it's going to touch in some of the slides that I have after this. So for those of you who are familiar, I guess I should have asked this question earlier. Have any of you stuck your nose in the broadband mapping situation in your day-to-day work, or at least are familiar with folks who have? I see a few hands. Of you folks, do you know the census block mapping problem? Raise your hands as well. Okay, good. So I know some folks are the choir here. Long story short, I very lightly alluded to it before. The old mapping standard basically said, if an address in a census block has service, the whole census block is going to be mapped as if it has service. Doesn't matter if your block is a small city block in downtown Milwaukee, or if it's a lake in Bayfield County way up north in Wisconsin. If one address is lit, that whole block is. That's not very accurate. So the biggest take home we had, I would say, is to collect or gather access validation, affordability, and adoption data at the most granular level we can swing while still managing confidentiality. And we want to be able to use that information along with other data that we can pull in from a variety of sources to help better identify areas with the greatest need for connectivity here in Wisconsin. And we want to drive further, and this becomes a bit more of a policy situation where we want to go and inventorize factors that help accelerate or inhibit the expansion of broadband. And of course, lastly, I shouldn't say lastly, really in concert through the whole process, we do want to work with data collection efforts that are out there already. Goodness knows how many times I've heard from the provider community, we don't want to have to do something twice if we don't have to. And I absolutely agree with that. I think the thought is, especially when you consider the FCC and their work and other stakeholders, we want to see that those data collection efforts are good enough. If there's ways we can support or ways we can build off of that, that's what we want to do. So a couple real world applications of where this comes in. The Wisconsin broadband coverage data collection, that voluntary data collection program that we have, has had an increasing amount of internet service providers in the state giving data to the Public Service Commission, where we can usually map things faster than the FCC can. And we don't follow that census block standard where we don't have to. So this allows our coverage data to get more accurate as well. And I'm actually in the process of updating other mapping layers, which I'm sure will make our local GIS folks happier. But we're going to start to be able to show more sub-census block data in our maps. In this last data collection round, we have about 90 fixed internet providers here in Wisconsin. We received sub-census block coverage data from just under half of them. A round ago, we got the sort of data from less than a quarter of them. So we're excited to see the increased voluntary participation from those providers. And what I've seen is a lot of our provider community, providers both large and small, are really trying to figure this out as they go as well, while I sit here wondering, how the heck are we going to map 60 companies or 40 companies, however have you, all their individual data sets at once? They're trying to figure out how to map their own. And what I'm hoping we can do this year is to really form a bit of a users group amongst the mappers in that community to certainly standardize the work that they are doing, keeping an eye to where the new FCC maps will go one of these days when those standards come out. But also we want to integrate them better with the larger Wisconsin geospatial industry or community, depending on how hard-nosed you want to sound when you say that terminology. I really think that connection making will help a lot of folks across the state. It will also, this is kind of a superfluous slide, it will help us figure out how to navigate this sort of mapping data. This is a little subset of what we received in this new data collection round, where there's a hodgepodge of model data that are coming usually from fixed wireless providers, some infrastructure, very direct infrastructure-based data, which usually comes out as buffered road center lines, and then folks who simply give us service areas of their coverage. We're not at a stage where we want to highlight and say this one data reporting methodology is the best yet, because I mean, there's a number of questions in play, but it's something I anticipate we'll be building up to in the near future. Another tool that we have to really enhance the transparency of our broadband expansion program is the broadband grant footprint tool. This is going to build up to be an interactive application, a little bit story map, a little bit dashboard that will allow folks to see really in detail what the impact of our 363 and counting grant programs have really been over the years. My mapping partner, Milena, is really driving the boat on this one. And we are both learning the hard way that reporting broadband grant data is not easy for anyone. Looking at that eye towards democratizing the approach to broadband mapping and planning, we just did a soft release of what we call WISER, the Wisconsin Internet Self-Report, which is a combination broadband user quality survey and speed test, so that basically citizens, visitors, businesses, et cetera, can report their on-the-ground experiences to us, because we still anticipate there's going to be cases of your broadband map, dear state of Wisconsin, is better than what I'm really dealing with. So how can I report that, and how can your broadband maps get more accurate? This is a step in that process. We are also looking forward to partnering with counties and other folks who are doing a bit of their own broadband planning to help basically reduce silos and also consider different basically data entry points to make our broadband planning a little more comprehensive. I've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to sprint through a couple of priority areas that we see coming up and pitch a question or two. Not that we're going to answer them right now, but might be something we can talk about here in the next few hours when there's time. Upcoming mapping priority areas for us include the concept of broadband intelligence, AKA a lot of the time broadband fabric. I do want to cite, I hope I have the name right, Lightbox, who made a mention this morning with their work with Montana and Georgia, looking at them, CostQuest Associates, and other folks who have done work to build this broadband fabric. I look at it as a filter of what places need broadband, fixed internet, what places don't. We need to get a handle on that here in Wisconsin. And I would argue, and this is a big part, in my opinion, of the broadband and GIS questions, really it is, we have these resources at the corporate and at the local government levels and everywhere in between, citing the land information program that Chris mentioned in his talk. What I would like to see is really a solution going forward that leverages the best of what these individual parties have to offer, knowing that, you know, at some point, dollars and cents and efficiencies going to have some rule of the day there too. But what's the magic mix for Wisconsin? Being better integrated across our local and statewide sectors for government or for local planning is important as well. And I am not the agency expert on this, but digging into equity and of course, deeper into affordability and adoption to make sure all folks in Wisconsin are served for what they need are priorities that are emerging and getting bigger for us as well. So I will be here until roughly 7 o'clock tonight, I think. And I have a motor mouth, so feel free to come talk to me or make me listen to you. I would love to hear more about your stories. And I'm going to hand this over to not only the COVID-19 mapping mastermind, but my bike repair person, Andy Swartz.
Thank you, Coulter. Thank you very much, all of you. And don't tell Coulter or any of these guys, but I also wax skis. Okay. Well, I was delighted to be asked to talk, and not only because I've been wanting to attend a NSGIC conference, and we're always eager to talk about the good things that we do in state government in Wisconsin, the GIS realm, but Also because I haven't been to a conference in a couple of years, so this is exciting. So greetings to all of you in the audience and to everybody online live, and then anybody who may happen to watch this a recorded version of this in the future. So greetings from Wisconsin. Okay, so I'm going to press one of these buttons, the big green button. And so again, I'm Andy Swartz. I'm the GIS lead for the state of Wisconsin Department of Health Services. Been there about 7 years. Prior to that, I was a municipal GIS coordinator for 11 years. So I worked on everything from sex offender registry, restricted areas, to sanitary sewer infrastructure, to bicycle route planning. So the GIS team at DHS, I'll tell you a little bit about before we launch into the content about what we've been up to the last couple of years. We've got 3 FTEs, half-time LTE. We're an internal service entity. We serve about 200 GIS users within the agency. Almost none of them are full-time GIS. They're not just, but they're people who have a master's in public health, or they're public health workers in various programs that do some GIS, and we support them. We manage our central GIS infrastructure for the agency. We manage a lot of data, nursing home locations, hospital locations, et cetera, including an open spatial data portal. It has much of that data public facing. We support the software, licensing, upgrades, all that stuff. We do the GIS training on everything from geocoding to desktop to you name it. We also built, operate, and support an enterprise geocoding service. That was something that when I first arrived in 2014, I felt was very, very important, that we have a really robust geocoding service for address standardization, validation, and geocoding, and we were able to get that stood up. I asked the person in my second interview in my job if it was possible to innovate in my job, because that was really important to me, because I was able to do that as a municipal GIS coordinator in a city of about 30,000. And I got kind of a sideways non-answer, but I took it as a yes, and I was able to innovate. It just took a little more tenacity and a little more patience than I would have liked it to have required. But DNR, Department of Workforce Development, several other agencies are also using our geocoding service, and we have almost 100% uptime for 4.5 years now, so we're very, very happy with it. We also do application development, data hosting, application hosting, managed data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're kind of a jack of all trades GIS shop. We're also understaffed. Everybody is. Okay, so I'm going to launch right in, jump around a few things, but so we you know, like everybody, we publish daily COVID case counts, right, for deaths, hospitalizations, et cetera. But one of the things that we're doing in Wisconsin, I think, is a little bit significant, is in our public-facing data, we're producing a lot of sub-county geographies. And we started with census tracts as early as the spring of 2020. I think it's worth noting, though, that the city of Milwaukee was actually out ahead of us. They actually had Milwaukee, city of Milwaukee, or maybe it was Milwaukee County, I forget. They had tracks before we did. And I also can't say that it was all me. I had GIS coordinators, kind of like Coulter gets phone calls. I had good GIS staff from the counties who I have known a long time and respect and have working relationships with, and they would call me up and say, Andy, the county data is great. It's good. But up here in Bayfield County, we need more granular data. And I recognize that as well, even before some of these calls came in, but I worked it and we got it done. So the key thing about the way we architected it is we build it in census blocks so that we can roll up to census tracts through crosswalk tables. We did that because I knew that we would then be able to roll those census blocks up to other geographies. And so then came ultimately school districts. School districts were a real win because when people were looking at school closures and school openings and mask mandates and yada, yada, the school administrators, if you can put yourself in their shoes, were trying to, kind of piece together what their COVID rates were in their respective districts from existing data. And it wasn't easy. And so when we did publish school districts, we think we saved a lot of time and we got a lot more, excuse me, frog in my throat, accurate Coulter wants his bike repaired. He's handing me water now. Anyhow, we think it worked. That's what I'm trying to say. The other thing that we did was zip code tabulation areas and wastewater treatment service areas. And some of you might be wondering, well, why were you doing wastewater treatment service areas? I have a slide dedicated to that, but that was also done out of the census blocks. Non-public facing, and there was some discussion about this. We did tribal boundaries, or we serve up tribal boundaries, local health districts, and then of course behind the scenes we've got the census blocks. So the local health districts and the tribal boundaries are shared out to the partners for that, but not to the public. Census blocks are not shared out at all. So the other thing that we've done, which I think is potentially significant, at least certainly a small minority of states have this, but we have historic COVID data available in GIS format going back to day one of our COVID data publication, which is March 15th of 2020. That means the whole enchilada, all of the historic data. Cases, deaths, tests, 7-day averages, et cetera. Of course, we're having some data growth issues. I've put our leadership on notice that our GIS infrastructure is not going to be able to hold and serve in a timely manner these data indefinitely. Somebody comes in with the wrong query and it's going to really tie things up. It's going to tie up a lot of resources and it's going to make other data not available. So the ArcGIS enterprise system that we have, which is 10.51, is, well, by the way, one of the first things we did when we started publishing the data, we were asked to publish COVID data back in March of 2020, as I said, we need more RAM, we need more processors, we need to, and so we definitely beefed up, so to speak, our infrastructure, but nonetheless, the database itself, the queries are really starting to become the problem. So if you're thinking about doing any complex queries on the historic data for COVID data in Wisconsin, don't. Thank you. So, okay. So other things that we're doing a little bit more recently in COVID response, and I should also mention, we published COVID data 7 days a week at 1:50 p.m. for about 1.5 years. And luckily we got a reprieve a few months ago and we were able to back that off to just 5 days a week. But we do it on holidays if holidays fall on weekdays. Nowadays we worked on testing site locations, vaccine allocations, more recently antiviral therapeutic drug allocations. And the thing about those three is that there's a lot of equity there, right? So it's you can evenly or geographically distribute these drugs, but when we did the analyses working with the program area specialty people, we worked with social vulnerability issues, we worked with racial makeups, we looked at poverty, we looked at where the most vulnerable populations were, and some of the allocations for tests for therapeutic drugs, for vaccines, took all that in consideration. So it was a very wonderful, from the GIS geek perspective, it was a very wonderful spatial analysis that we had the privilege to work with the subject matter experts on. And those are the sorts of things, I don't know about you all, but those are the sorts of things that make me excited to get out of bed in the morning and go to my job, because I know that I'm making a difference, not just in getting the drugs out the door, but getting them to the right people. And we're making a difference in the public health in the state of Wisconsin and the people of the state of Wisconsin. So that's why I come to work. Other things that we've done are more recently supporting staffing at facilities, because we've got, as you all do probably as well, staffing shortages at some of your nursing facilities and other facilities. So we've been working on allocations of National Guard staff to some of those facilities. Okay, we're actually getting near the end of my presentation, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the wastewater sampling for COVID. How many of you from your respective states have some COVID wastewater sampling going on, even if it's at the local level? I know Frank from New York, raise your hand. So a few of you, okay. So you guys, some of you know, or probably all of you know what this is all about, which is that COVID is detectable in wastewater. So we worked with the University of Milwaukee and some people at the State Lab of Hygiene in Wisconsin, and then of course our DHS staff and my team. We got involved in this, and they basically wanted to test wastewater at the sampling points at the plants for COVID content, and then they wanted us to build COVID case information based on the wastewater treatment plant service areas. And then they wanted to look and see if they're tracking. And knowing that if testing wasn't reliable or testing fell off, that we would still be able to see spikes or increases or rate changes in COVID cases in those geographic areas, and all sorts of PhD theses and hopefully dissertations will be done out of this. So naturally, I called my friends at the Department of Natural Resources and I said, hey, could you all send over your wastewater treatment plant service area boundaries? And they said, oh, we don't have those. And I said, you don't have those? No, we don't have those. So you regulate wastewater treatment plants, but you don't have maps of the service areas. No, we don't. Yeah. They said, but we do a survey to the wastewater treatment facilities and we could add that to the survey for the future. It's a great idea. Great idea. Yeah. So luckily I had a new LTE, a GIS technician who had come out of she was an Oregon Duck. She had just graduated from the University of Oregon, Eugene, and she was very strong GIS junior staffer. She was from the Madison area, and she'd come home because of COVID. She was living in her mom's house with all of her sisters, and she wanted to work for DHS, so we were lucky to have her, and I threw her right into this. We put together some protocol on how we were going to gather the wastewater treatment data. We asked for the Holy Grail, which was a nice, tidy GIS data set in shapefile or geodatabase format, right? But we knew that very few were going to have that. So then we said, well, send us your pipes, send us your laterals, if you have laterals. If you don't have that, maybe you've just got a, maybe you've got a paper map that we could digitize off of. So, and Frank mentioned earlier before we started that in New York State, they have attribution on private or public sanitary sewer service in the parcel data. And I don't believe we have that in Wisconsin. So boy, if I'd had that, I guess my job might have been a little easier. But what we ended up doing for about the 100 largest municipalities in the state, we ended up building wastewater treatment plant service areas. And that included a lot of letter writing to the municipalities. My experience as a municipal GIS coordinator for 11 years served me well in this, but even then I wasn't prepared for my colleague and friend Jenny from the city of Brookfield here, suburban Milwaukee, calling me up and saying, well, Andy, I'd like to help you out with the data here, but it's not as simple as you think it is, at least not in Brookfield. I said, what do you mean, Jenny? She said, well, it's kind of complicated. We should probably have a Zoom call. So we got a Zoom call. She said, Andy, city of Brookfield is served by 3 different wastewater treatment plants. And the village of Menominee Falls, their sanitary lines run through the city of Brookfield to another plant. So I was in kind of an island. I was at the city of Sun Prairie. We just had one plant and one service area. So I was very familiar with the pipes and the networks and the infrastructure, but I wasn't ready for that. But we worked through it. We also had the fun part where they're like, well, we'd be glad to help you, but we actually farm out all of our GIS to a consulting firm. So we'd have to ask them, and I'd have to get permission to spend money to have them billable hours to send you the data. So is that 54 seconds? Yes. Oh, well, anyhow. Hey, there's a URL here. We have a public facing dashboard. And if you look at the dashboard, you'll see cool things like COVID spikes. The samples are the dots, and the COVID rates from that service area are the curve, and they kind of match, except for in the very small number of places where they don't. And that's really the mystery, is why do most of them match, but some don't. Smarter people than me will study that for a long time to come. GIS staffing, we had surge staffing that worked real well when we ramped up in 2020. And then we've also added some actual full-time GIS staff to the COVID response team. So this has been some impacts of COVID on our agency and our GIS landscape. And I'm done with.
You just had, you did it.
I have,
seconds left.
I have 1 second. Beep. Thank you very much. And at this time, we've got a few minutes for questions for all 4 of us. And then I'll stick around a little after if any of you want to have one-on-one conversations. And I'm also going to be available by email or telephone if you want to reach me that way. So thank you all.
Questions from the audience or online attendees?
Hi, Dan. This is Jamie. We do have a question online from Kim Cloud in Delaware, please.
Hi, guys. It's me again. I was wondering, you mentioned equity a little bit. We got a request to map for broadband. They want to look at our broadband grants where our funding is going through an equity lens. So looking at it with the social vulnerability index and demographic information. Is that something that you guys are looking at or have any ideas or lessons learned to share?
I'm not sure that I caught all of the end of that, Kim, but I will say, and you can fill in after I ramble for a second here. Our broadband office is certainly digging into things with more of that equity and affordability lens. I will say with this year's round 2, if you will, of our governor's task force for broadband, and where last year things were kind of more broad spectrum, larger umbrella touching all those A's that I talked about before. This year, affordability and equity are taking on a much bigger theme. It's not directly shaking the grant program as yet, as I understand it, but it's a growing aspect of the work we're doing. And certainly if you want to talk about that more, like we can be in touch through contacts here after the conference as well, Kim.
Yeah, that would be great. I would just love to learn lessons learned from anybody, because I'm looking at the data now, trying to figure out the best way to represent it and make sure it makes sense and is easy and stuff. So I think if any of us can share any lessons learned, that'd be great. So I'd love to talk later.
I think that's great. And I'll say like Wisconsin would be open to that from folks who are more familiar with it, especially with a GIS bent as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kim. And I think we can go to the next question. I'll leave the moderators to do this.
Thanks, Frank from New York. So my question goes to the data practices around the pandemic and any fallout or pushback that you might have gotten. And the National Pandemic GIS Task Force, one of the first things we did is we did a survey of a whole bunch of people across the country that were involved, from public health to GIS to emergency response. And the number one impediment to them being as effective as they could have been was accessibility to the data. So you're a brilliant outlier in Wisconsin for having that granular data available at the same unit of geography that Census uses to protect privacy in the American Community Survey. That's one of the pitches that I keep making. But I'd love to hear, was there any pushback? Was there any fallout? So many policies are around a fear of something bad that might happen, even though, and they're hiding behind maybe a very broad net cast of their understanding of HIPAA. But I'd love your perspective on that.
Well, first of all, we do have some data suppression. So if you were to attempt to roll up the tracks and add all the tract values up for case counts and then take the same date and take all the counties, you're going to get 2 different numbers. So it's important to note that at state of Wisconsin, we have had a lot of rigor around data suppression because of the low count. Small geographies, you're more likely to get low counts. And the challenge is that you have to suppress in perpetuity. Once you've suppressed, you have to continue suppressing those data. You can't just pop them in later. So that's kind of complicated, but there was pushback. There was pushback from the tribes and the local health department districts when we proposed to publish at those geographies because, well, a few concerns. And that's why we end up just supplying that stuff directly to them through some portals we have that only they have access to, rather than making those geographies, those sub-county geographies public. Leadership in the agency was a little reluctant when we proposed the tracks. And I did have to, I proposed that early. And we actually it felt like we waited a long time, ironically, before we could get them out the door. But it was really only a few weeks. And we just kept making the case, and we talked about the local perspective. And it's important to note that Wisconsin's a home rule state. So, we have this different balance maybe than some states between state government and local government. And so there's a lot more weight at the local government in terms of governing. And that may have played into the decision to offer the more granular data that was infinitely more useful to the local decision makers and local public health officials. Hopefully that helps Frank.
Neil McGaffey, Massachusetts. As far as the mapping of the COVID at this greater geographic granularity, I assume this was a geocoding exercise to get them into the right sub-geography, and what were you geocoding against?
So we have a system called WEDS, which is Wisconsin Electronic Disease Surveillance System, where many diseases come in, the data come in, and they're aggregated from the locals. And then that is, everything's geocoded there in blocks as one of the outputs of the geocoding service. It's the subscriber for that application is Melissa Data. The geocoding service that I built actually is Melissa Data as well, but we subscribe to the rooftop level. Of course, rooftop is rooftop where available, whereas WEDS is actually the block level, so city block level, not census block level. But the devil's in the details on that. It really comes down to address quality, and one of the things that I evangelize a lot about within my agency is address quality. Syntax, completeness, et cetera, because we know it improves geocoding outcomes. And that's something that I'm really passionate about, is trying to keep the quality up on those data. So, and people, some people will drink from the trough right away, but sometimes you have to lead them there and they'll stand around for a while. Then eventually they'll drink from the trough when they start seeing the impacts on the quality of the mapping, the quality of the spatial analyses, and the quality of the data. We also have a half-day geocoding workshop that we run. I've run about 70 different people from 10 different state agencies through our geocoding workshop. And that's been making a difference in our collective understanding of address quality and how that impacts mapping capabilities through geocoding services.
I'd like to have us thank our host state for enlightening us, entertaining us, and continuing that relationship. I've already sent LinkedIn requests, so let's continue the conversation and let's have a big hand for Wisconsin.